So I recently just did my annual free agent predictions, and by the way, thank you to all the new subscribers coming from that video. I do really appreciate that. But one guy that I left off was someone that I didn't think was going to be a free agent, and that's Shota Imanaga. Also, by the way, I have a new plan. So today, both sides declined their options for his contract, the Cubs declining the 3-year, $57 million option for him, and Imanaga declining his $15 million player option. Now, this might seem a little surprising, and part of me was a little bit surprised because he was very good for them last year and in the first half of this past season. But when you take a look a little deeper at the numbers this year, it makes sense for the Cubs to not exercise the option. Now, sure, he had a pretty good ERA at a 3.73, but the FIP was a lot higher at a 4.86. That's because the home run rate this year with him was very high, 1.9 home runs per nine. That was the second highest in all of Major League Baseball among pitchers that threw at least 100 innings. And he was eventually passed over in Game 5 of the division round against the Brewers. So that right there showed that they didn't really trust him very much in the postseason. And funny enough, with the home run rate, that was actually a bit of a worry with Imanaga when he was coming over from Japan a couple of years ago, because he had a 1 home run per 9 rate in his final year in the NPB, which is considered pretty high because that number tends to double in the major leagues. You don't really see a whole lot of home runs over in Japan, and this year it basically doubled. Now, most of that came in the second half after coming back from a hamstring injury. He had a 4.70 ERA in the second half with 2.3 home runs per 9 compared to the first half, in which he had an ERA of a 2.65 with 1.4 home runs per 9. Still pretty high, but a lot better than what it was in the second half. And also, looking at his fastball, it was still getting pretty good movement this past year, something that was very big with Imanaga coming over from Japan a couple of years ago, because it basically offset the low velo that it had, and it made the pitch very good. He was also still getting very good results with the splitter and the sweeper. So to me, I think after the hamstring injury, I think he just had a tough time finding that consistency again. My guess is it was probably something mechanically that was going on that was messing with his location, because he still was very good before the injury, and his pitches were still getting the same amount of movement that they've been getting over the last couple of years. That's why I am a little surprised that the Cubs didn't exercise the option, because before the injury, everything was looking good. Now, maybe the Cubs do still want to keep him around, but maybe they think they can work out a different kind of a contract, maybe still around 3 years, but at a lower AAV, or maybe just a shorter deal overall. But would Imanaga want to do that? I'm not so sure. And then again, when it comes to the Cubs, I do wonder if there's a possibility that they would rather use that money to invest in other spending. Maybe they're trying to get all their pennies together to make a big offer for Kyle Tucker to try and keep him around, or if not that, maybe they would rather use that money to put towards more ceiling in the rotation, go after one of the best options out there in free agency this year, say Dylan Cease or Framber Valdez. Or heck, maybe they want to go after another Japanese arm out there in Tatsuya Imai. Now, if they don't have interest in keeping him around or don't want to be aggressive for him, I do think there's going to be a lot of other teams out there that would show interest in him because of the quality of his fastball movement, along with the strong secondaries that he has. So I'm going to go over a few teams here that I think would be a good fit for Imanaga. Let's go talk about it. First up, I think you got to look at the Mets. Now, I do think the Mets need to focus on adding more ceiling to the rotation, and they could use one of Nolan McLean, Joe Natong, or Brandon Sproat in a trade for someone like Joe Ryan, or maybe even Tarek Skubal, but why not a high-floor guy like Imanaga? Now, the Mets were very interested in Imanaga before he went to the Cubs, and that's not surprising since they have emphasized more of an analytical approach over the last couple of years since David Stearns took over. That ended up helping a lot of guys like Luis Severino and Sean Manaea back in 2024 to help get their careers back on track. Clay Holmes, they signed him as a starter after he was a reliever his entire career, and that transition ended up going pretty well. Now, Imanaga was in a pitcher-friendly park at Wrigley, but funny enough, his home run rate was actually less on the road this year, so maybe the Mets can figure something out with him to get him right. And hey, they do have Kadai Senga there as well, who's also from Japan, so maybe that could help out too. Then again, like I said, I do think the Mets need to add more to the top of the rotation, guys like Tarek Skubal or Joe Ryan in a trade possibly. Maybe they can go after someone like Dylan Cease or Framber Valdez, but I do think they need to add someone, starting pitcher 1, starting pitcher 2 at the very least. They got to maximize that rotation. Would Imanaga really, be a guy that you put at the top of the rotation? No, you're looking at like a mid-rotation, back of the rotation kind of a guy. And they do have guys that should be more healthy and better next year, like Manaea and hopefully Senga are going to get themselves right. So I think it's a bit crowded crowded there with the Mets, but like I said, they did show interest in him a couple of years ago, and David Stearns is always looking for value any way he can, especially on the pitching side. Another team that showed interest in Imanaga a couple of years ago was the Red Sox. Now, after Craig Breslow came over, he revamped the pitching department with more emphasis on the analytics, and they've been a lot better since then, so it's not surprised that they were into the fastball movement and all the secondary pitches that Imanaga had. Now, the question is, would they still show the same interest? I think you could see a phone call, more due diligence, but I have a hard time seeing them going that way because they need to focus more on the top of the rotation like the Mets. They got to add a guy behind Garrett Crochet, and they got a lot of other guys in the fold here as well. They got Peyton Tolley, Connolly Early, their top two pitching prospects. Kyle Harrison, they brought back in the Rafi Devers trade from the Giants. They got Hunter Dobbins, Richard Fitz, who were getting some action this past year. They ran into some health issues, but I expect them to be healthy for next year at some point and be in the mix. And Cutter Crawford, Patrick Sandoval are going to be coming back this season. So a lot of guys here. I don't know if Imanaga really fits. And also, I'm a little bit worried about Imanaga at Fenway Park. I'll also include the Astros in this mix. Now, because of the home run rate, along with righties pulling off them this past year at 45%, which is pretty high, I don't think that ballpark would be a great fit for him with the Crawford boxes out there in left field. However, I'm going to include the Astros because they have done a good job with pitchers over the last couple of years to help them either get back on track or get them to the next level. Think about Yusei Kikuchi. When they brought him over at the trade deadline from the Blue Jays, they altered his pitch mix a little bit, had him throw more of a slider, and he was great for them in the second half in 2024. They also got someone like Ronel Blanco to another level. Remember, he was in the bullpen for the first couple of years of his career, but in his first year as a full-time starter, he threw a no-hitter for crying out loud. So they have helped these guys get back on track, and they could use some more pitching in the rotation with Framber Valdez becoming a free agent, and Imanaga would be a lot cheaper. But in the end, though, I don't like the fit of the ballpark. Again, righties pulled off him a lot this past year. I don't know if the Astros would like those metrics, so I don't really think they would be a big contender for him. Earlier, I mentioned Tarek Skubal, and if he were to get traded, why not the Tigers? They've been very big with the pitching lab over there, and pitchers' fastballs in Detroit have averaged very low downward movement, or in other words, they get a lot more ride compared to other pitchers out there on the fastball, which is what Imanaga's fastball does well. And I could see pitching coach Chris Fetter, who's highly respected across the game, having a fun time working with Imanaga. Now, if the Tigers do end up trading Skubal, they're definitely going to need to add some pitching, and I could see Imanaga's price tag being something the Tigers front office would like. They have a spacious ballpark there as well, so that would be another good fit for Imanaga. And heck, even if they end up keeping Tarek Skubal, I still think Imanaga could be an option, especially since Jackson Jobe got Tommy John and he's going to miss a lot more time. Speaking of spacious ballparks, how about the Padres? Now, with Dylan Cease and Michael King becoming free agents, they're going to need some pitching over there in San Diego. Now, I do think there's a good chance that Michael King ends up going back there to try and up his value again after a lot of injuries this year, but I do think Cease is going to end up going somewhere else. Now, like the Tigers, the Padres also have averaged very low downward movement on the fastballs, getting more ride on them. And again, that is how Imanaga's fastball profiles, so maybe that's something the Padres would like. And also, San Diego on the West Coast, that is something Japanese players have preferred a lot in the past. Now, it didn't matter much to Imanaga when he went to the Cubs, but I don't know, maybe he would like the idea of going closer to home. And don't forget, they got Yu Darvish in the fold there, one of the best ever coming out of Japan, and they did swing and miss on Roki Sasaki last year, so maybe this could be AJ Preller's chance for some redemption to land another pitcher out of Japan. The last team I'll mention are the Giants. Again, a spacious park out in San Francisco, also on the West Coast. Again, Japanese players have preferred the West Coast in the past, and with Giants pitchers over the last few years, they've gotten a lot of glove arm side movement with fastball type pitches. Now, I said earlier that the Tigers and the Padres have averaged less downward movement on their fastballs, getting more ride, but with the Giants, they've leaned more into the glove arm side movement, and Imanaga's fastball also gets a lot of arm side run, or tail, whatever you want to call it, so perhaps they would like how his fastball plays. Another thing I like about this fit is the Giants do have some openings in the rotation to the point where they could bring in Imanaga and still go after a high upside arm like Dylan Cease or Framber Valdez. Another thought is maybe they could bring in Imanaga, and maybe that could help tempt Tatsuya Imai to go over there as well. Just a thought. But I do like the Giants as a fit overall. I do think all these teams that I talked about will show some kind of interest, but I do like the Giants. I think the Padres would be a pretty good fit as well. I think the Tigers could be a pretty fun fit. But those are just my thoughts. Let me know what you think down below in the comments. What do you think about Imanaga becoming a free agent? Were you surprised by it? Were you not surprised by it? Let me know. And where do you think he's going to end up landing? Do you think he'll stay with the Cubs? Do you think he'll go to a new team? Let me know down below. But everybody, that's all I got for right now. If you can on the way out, hit the like button, subscribe if you're new, and I'll talk to you next time.